Welcome to our Thursday movie night. We love the TV series called The Chosen. I'd like to remind you that to watch the actual episodes, you're going to need to go to The Chosen TV, thechosen.tv to watch them. You can watch on a browser, or better yet, you can download the free app and you can watch on your mobile device. And some smart TVs now have an Angel Studios app as another way to watch all the episodes for free. Again, let me repeat, due to new copyright changes, we're not going to be able to show the actual episode here on our YouTube channel. So you will need to watch the episode either on the website or one of the apps. I'd like to encourage you to be sure to turn on closed captions. You'll get a whole lot more out of the episode if you do. It's our hope that this little introduction we give each week will give you a little bit of a boost so that you can better enjoy the series. First, a segment we call In the Scriptures. You may want to jot down some of these verses so you can look them up later. Matthew 6, verses 5 through 15, this passage is a part of the Sermon on the Mount, which has been an underlying thread throughout the last couple of episodes. We've heard Jesus make mention of a big sermon he's working on, though this is not going to be the sermon. The passage here is only a small part of what will become the sermon and has to do with prayer. The passage starts with a warning about fake prayers. Jesus said, "And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward." You're going to see some of this fake praying in our episode, so look for it. Look for some of this fake praying. The other part of the passage contains what we call the Lord's Prayer, and I'll let you look that up on your own. Luke chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. This is a passage that's parallel to the same passage we just mentioned in Matthew 6, but the context is different. This too contains part of what we call the Lord's Prayer. But instead of it being part of a larger sermon, the prayer comes at the request of the disciples. In Luke 11, verse 1, it says, "Now it came to pass, as he was praying in a certain place, when he ceased, that one of the disciples said to him, 'Lord, teach us to pray, as John also taught his disciples.' So he said to them, 'When you pray, say, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name.'" And then he goes on. On a side note, let me say that in my observations in the Gospels, I don't believe that Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount only on one occasion. I believe that he often repeated various parts of the sermon in various places. First century people didn't have tape recorders, YouTube, or podcasts. They didn't have the ability to subscribe to Jesus' regular teachings. Jesus would travel from city to city, from place to place, and share the same things, sometimes maybe over and over again. Why bring this up? Because some people will look at Luke's version of the sermon and claim that the Bible contradicts itself because Luke records Jesus giving the sermon in a slightly different location and the sermon's a little different. I think it's more plausible to think that Jesus gave the same messages many times in many places with variations each to fit his audience. For your own research, add Matthew chapters 5 through 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount, with Luke chapter 6, which I would call the Sermon on the Plain, add these to your verses that you look up and study. As we've said with the previous episodes, and even more so in this episode, the producers will introduce things with which we have no record of Jesus or the disciples saying or doing. But the principles that are being laid out are generally very consistent with the character of Jesus as well as the cultural background of how people lived in the first century. In a way, it is not much different than when a pastor teaches you about the culture and the language of the Bible. There is a lot to be learned when it comes to the background of what we read in Scripture. But if your only ideas about Jesus come from watching The Chosen, you are cheating yourself. As the producers of The Chosen would also encourage you, make sure that you are reading your Bible, and especially the Gospels, for the best information. It's the Bible we build our lives on, not The Chosen. Now, on to our section that we call Terms and Practices. Let me put this under this heading here, Tension in Judea. Again, most of this episode is not found in the New Testament. There is a lot of tension going on in the land of Judea. You might call it the land of Israel, but it was called Judea in those days. There will be Pharisees on the hunt for new evidence against Jesus in our episode. There will be Romans trying to figure out who Jesus is. I believe that the producers of the Chosen are setting the stage for things that will unfold much later in Jesus' ministry. At the end of his life, Jesus will be put to death by a confluence of Jewish and Roman rulers. The Jewish rulers, or Sanhedrin, had their own set of religious concerns. Jesus will stand trial before the Sanhedrin and be condemned. Jesus' eventual trial before the Sanhedrin didn't come out of nowhere at the last week of Jesus' life. Someone was collecting evidence and speaking against Jesus. The Romans were the occupying power in the land of Judea. They too had constant concerns about keeping the Jewish population pacified and in their place. Jesus would stand trial before Roman authorities. But, it's kind of hard to believe that before Jesus was condemned by Pilate and Herod Antipas, that this was the first that they would be aware of the rabbi from Nazareth. We know that from the earliest miracles performed by Jesus, various authorities were aware of him. This episode will remind us that Jesus' trouble didn't spring up the last week of his life. Jotapata. Do you remember me mentioning this last week? It kind of sounds like the name of a planet in Star Wars or something. This city that was only briefly mentioned last week will play a much bigger role in tonight's episode. The city is in the north, in the area of we would call the northern area Galilee, about 8 miles north of Nazareth. And just a side note, the producers insert Jotapata into the narrative because of its history of rebellion against Rome, not because of its location. They will give you the impression that it's near the Sea of Galilee when it's actually 14 miles west of Galilee and probably almost 1,000 feet difference in altitude. I mentioned last week that some 35 years after our episode in AD 67, during the final Jewish rebellion, this will be the location of a great battle with Rome. Vespasian would be leading the Roman armies and lay siege to the city that was located on top of a hill. Josephus records that 40,000 Jews were killed and 1,200 were taken into slavery. What's fascinating about Josephus' account is that he was the Jewish general in charge of fighting the Romans in Jotapata. He would eventually escape the siege and surrender himself to the Romans. You can read about Josephus' account for yourself. It's in his book, The Wars of the Jews, Book 3, Chapter 7, and you can find it online for free. I Google Flavius Josephus, Wars of the Jews. I found it fascinating reading. But in Jesus' day, Jotapata would be a hotbed of Jewish rebellion. But just to balance it, we have no record of Jesus or his disciples visiting Jotapata, nor is it mentioned in the New Testament. Capernaum, this is the city along the Sea of Galilee that was a sort of home base to Jesus and his disciples. The synagogue at Capernaum had been involved in the life of Jesus from the beginning. Just keep that in mind. The letters SPQR, you're going to see various things with the initial SPQR on them. If you look for it. These initials stand for the Latin phrase Senatus Populusque Romanus, which translated means the Senate and people of Rome. So this is a kind of a Roman insignia. Ema, that's the term that we've learned means mother. Jesus will translate this term for a Roman as mater mea, which means my mother. That's interesting. Let's talk about arguing disciples. You are going to see the disciples arguing a lot. Did I mention to you that you'd hear the disciples having arguments, disagreements? Did the disciples argue? Yes, they did. Here's what I want to challenge you to pay attention and take note of in this episode. Pay attention here. What are the disciples arguing about? Really, what are they arguing about? And they are going to learn some valuable lessons by the very end. They're going to learn some lessons about the things that they are arguing over. So pay attention. See if you can pick up on these lessons. We'll talk about it in the discussion. Lastly, a section we refer to as characters. I'm hoping that by now you're quite familiar with Jesus and the disciples. Tonight, I want to remind you of a few old friends. Atticus, as we know, is the cohorte urbanae, kind of a Roman spy. He has great authority, and the local Roman magistrates are a bit afraid of him. He was tracking Simon the Zealot, or Simon Z, we refer to him, and he's aware of how Jesus healed Simon's brother Jesse. He knew about this. He watched Jesus take Simon's Sika knife and throw it in the water, and how Simon is now following Jesus. He knows about Jesus casting out demons from the demoniac. He is intrigued with Jesus. By the way, wouldn't it make sense that Rome would be interested in tracking a zealot like Simon the Zealot? Quintus, he is the praetor of Capernaum. He's kind of like the Roman governor who oversees the city. We were quite acquainted with him in season 1. He is arrogant, sarcastic, and ruthless, and he is disgusted with the Jews. Gaius was a centurion in season 1, charged with guarding Matthew when he was a tax collector. He was promoted to the rank of primi, and I got to remind you, he cares about Matthew. He really does. He cares about him a lot. Shmuel and Yanni are the two Pharisees on the trail of Jesus and collecting evidence of Jesus' transgressions against Jewish tradition. Yusuf is another Pharisee from Capernaum. He is a disciple of Nicodemus and is a bit more sympathetic toward Jesus. Get to know his face. Get a good look at it there. Tamar is a woman from Ethiopia who first encountered Jesus on the road when he healed the leper in season 1, episode 6. She would later, in that same episode, find Jesus in the city of Capernaum, and with her 4 friends would bring the paralytic to Jesus and lower him through the roof so Jesus could heal her friend. And she loves telling people about Jesus. To find out more about The Chosen and to watch tonight's episode, open your browser and go to thechosen.tv on the web, or download the free app on your mobile device. If you are on a smart TV, you may be able again to add an Angel Studios app to watch the episode. Be sure you are watching season 2, episode 7, titled Reckoning. Again, that's season 2, episode 7. It's the next to the last one, and it's called Reckoning. We also want to encourage you to give your financial support to this project. We do. We'd also like to encourage you to think about hosting a watch party. Even if you've already seen each episode, we are finding it so much more fun and edifying to watch with others. And after you've watched the episode, head back to the church YouTube channel. We will follow up each episode with a live discussion in our office studio, unpacking and exploring some of the themes and ideas that came up in the episode. We'll start as the credits are rolling. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share during our post-episode discussion, just text the church office at 714-879-3314. We will do our best to address as many of the comments as we can. So here we go. Go and watch the episode, and we'll see you back here afterwards for our discussion in about 40 to 45 minutes.